a season vanish without vanishing from the calendar? In the year 1816, the world did not forget how to count. The almanacs were printed. The church bells rang. The farmers sowed their fields on time. And yet, summer did not arrive. Not late. Not weak. Absent. In New England, snow fell in June, quietly, as if the sky had mistaken the month. Frost hardened the ground in July. Ponds filmed over in August. Seedlings blackened where they stood. Men who had lived by the rhythm of seasons all their lives looked at the sky and did not recognize it. Across the Atlantic and parts of Europe, the same pattern unfolded. Cold rains, failed harvests, gray light that lingered without warmth. The sun rose, but it did not nourish. This is not folklore. It was written in ledgers, recorded in parish notes, marked in the price of grain. Wheat doubled, then tripled. Bread grew scarce. And yet, when we are taught history, this year passes almost silently. A footnote, a curiosity, a line between wars and presidency. But those who lived through it did not experience it as a footnote. They experienced it as interruption. Imagine tending a field your father tended, and his father before him. Knowing when to plant, not by clock, but by the smell of soil and the tilt of the sun. Then one year, the soil does not answer. The wind carries a chill that does not belong to June. The birds migrate strangely. Cattle weaken. It was not a single storm, not a single failed region. It was widespread, persistent, unsettling. Some diaries describe a dimness in the air, a light that felt filtered, muted. Not darkness, not night, something else. In coastal towns, fishermen spoke of unusual currents. In inland villages, ministers called for days of fasting, not out of panic, out of confusion. Because what does a community do when the order it trusts falters? We are told today that nature is predictable, that patterns are stable, that seasons keep their promises. But in 1816, the promise was broken. And what remains most curious is not only that it happened, but how little we linger on it. An entire summer that did not behave like summer. Snow in June, ice in July, hunger by autumn. And yet no monument marks it, no ritual remembers it. Just scattered notes, quiet entries in fading ink. Why? If a single village loses its harvest, it is tragedy. If a continent loses its harvest, it becomes something else. In 1816, reports moved slowly, by horse, by ship, by word of mouth carried along trade roads. And yet the pattern was unmistakable. From Vermont to Virginia, farmers replanted again and again, seeds placed into soil that refused to warm. Corn sprouted, then withered beneath a frost that did not belong to summer. In parts of Pennsylvania, ice formed half an inch thick in August. In New York, sheep froze in open pastures. Across the ocean, in Ireland and Scotland, oats failed in the fields. In France, vineyards bore little fruit. Markets did not argue with the sky. They responded. The price of bread climbed beyond reach. Families thinned their meals, then skipped them. Horses were slaughtered, not in celebration, in necessity. In Switzerland, food riots stirred. In rural England, laborers wandered in search of work that no harvest could provide. Migration increased, not from ambition, from hunger. What is rarely said aloud is how fragile order becomes when the field fails. For generations, communities had trusted the cycle. Plant, tend, harvest, store. It was not merely agriculture, it was rhythm, a covenant between earth and people. When that covenant faltered, uncertainty entered quietly. Church records from that year speak not only of scarcity, but of anxiety. Days of prayer were called, not against enemies, not against war, against the sky. In some towns, the sun appeared pale, as if seen through thin cloth, light without warmth. Paintings from the period carry unusual skies, muted reds, strange haze. Observers did not possess instruments to measure what they felt. They measured it in crops, in livestock, in burial numbers, and in silence. Because how do you explain that the season itself seems altered? It was not one failed crop. It was a pattern across distances that should not have shared a pattern. No shared ruler, no shared council. Yet the cold touched them all. And still, in our retelling of history, we hurry past it, as though famine without war is less dramatic, as though snow in June is merely weather. But for those who stood in frozen fields, beneath a summer sky, it felt like something larger, not spectacle. Disruption. When harvests fail once, communities endure. When they fail repeatedly, communities begin to move. In the wake of 1816, roads filled quietly, not with armies, with families. Ox carts creaked westward across the American interior. New settlements appeared along the edges of forests and rivers, not always from ambition, often from exhaustion. A farmer who has watched 3 plantings turn black does not argue with memory. He leaves. Town records show abandoned properties, unpaid debts, church pews half empty by autumn. In New England, some called it 1800 and froze to death. The phrase lingered longer than the frost. Across the Atlantic, the consequences were heavier. In parts of Germany and Switzerland, malnutrition weakened entire districts. Diseases followed hunger, as they often do. Bread riots were not theatrical. They were restrained. Crowds asking for flour, not gold. Grain merchants were watched carefully. Storage barns guarded. In Ireland, the failure of oats meant more than inconvenience. It meant dependence on what little remained. The old order of rural life, rooted in predictability, began to feel uncertain. And uncertainty does something subtle. It loosens faith in permanence. Children born in those years grew up, and households that had seen the sky behave strangely. That memory does not disappear quickly. It changes how land is valued, how risk is weighed, how migration is considered. Even art shifted. In the dim summer of 1816, a small gathering in Switzerland remained indoors for weeks. Cold rain pressing against the windows, gray skies refusing to clear. Stories were told to pass the time, stories of creation and loss. The atmosphere entered imagination, not loudly, but persistently. And still, when history is summarized, as though hunger were ordinary, as though cold in July were anecdote. But if we step back, a larger question begins to form. When the natural order falters across continents, and societies strain under the weight of it, why does memory soften so quickly? Wars are remembered, battles named, generals carved in stone, but a summer that did not arrive is left in scattered ink, perhaps because it leaves no ruins, no shattered walls, only weakened fields and quiet departures. There is something unsettling about an event that alters the world without leaving behind a single monument. No battlefield, no fallen empire, no treaty signed in candlelight, only empty granaries and memories carried privately. In the years that followed 1816, communities rebuilt. Fields were planted again. Seasons gradually resumed their rhythm. And with that rhythm returned, so did a kind of relief. Relief has a way of smoothing memory. When warmth finally returned, when harvests once again filled barns, the urgency of that strange year began to fade. Not erased, but folded inward. In some regions, farmers altered their practices, diversified crops, moved further south, sought land less vulnerable to frost. Quiet adjustments, no declarations. The architecture of survival changed subtly. Root cellars were reinforced. Storage expanded. Communities became cautious in ways not always recorded. And yet, In official retellings, the year remains brief. A mention. A passing remark. Why? Perhaps because it resists a simple narrative. It was not caused by invasion, not by a single decision that can be named. It was diffuse, atmospheric, elusive. When something cannot be easily personified, it becomes difficult to memorialize. There is no statue to cold wind, no ceremony for gray light. But for those who stood in fields and watched seedlings die under summer frost, it was not abstract. It was personal. Family histories carry faint traces of it. A migration, a lost farm, an ancestor who left that year. But the larger story dissolves into broader timelines. Industrial growth resumes. Rail lines expand. Nations turn their attention elsewhere. Progress, once restarted, prefers not to dwell on interruption. And yet, the interruption happened. Across oceans, across languages. A single year, when the expected order faltered. And what unsettles the careful observer is not only the cold itself, but how swiftly collective memory allows such a rupture to become peripheral. What else, we might wonder, has been treated the same way? When we look at stone, we expect endurance. When we look at weather, we expect repetition. The year 1816 disturbed that expectation. For centuries, agricultural life rested not on instruments, but on inherited observation. The angle of light in early spring, the thickness of river ice, the return of certain birds. Knowledge was embodied, passed from hand to hand. A grandfather did not consult a chart. He read the soil. He felt the air before dawn. And in that year, those inherited readings failed, not because the farmers forgot their craft, but because the sky no longer matched memory. This is what makes the event so quiet and so profound. It challenged the reliability of tradition, not permanently, but enough. In some places, communal rituals intensified. Harvest blessings grew more urgent. Processions for favorable weather reappeared in villages that had not needed them for decades. Faith was not theatrical. It was practical. When the earth becomes uncertain, people return to older assurances. And yet, as generations passed, the memory thinned. Children born in the warmth of restored summers did not feel the frost of June in their bones. They inherited stories, perhaps. But stories soften with retelling. Without monuments, memory becomes anecdote. Without ruins, history becomes footnote. The year without a summer left no shattered city walls, no collapsed towers, only altered trajectories. A family that emigrated west, a farm sold, a vineyard abandoned, a quiet line in a parish book noting poor harvest. In a world increasingly oriented toward industry and progress, such fragility did not fit the emerging narrative. The 19th century preferred invention, expansion, steel, steam. A year of cold and hunger stood in contrast to that upward arc, so it settled into the margins, not denied, not debated, simply reduced. And yet, if we listen carefully to those margins, we hear something else, a reminder that stability is assumed, not guaranteed. That cycles we consider dependable have faltered before, and that entire societies can be shaped by a season the textbooks barely pause to mention. There is a tendency in modern memory to honor what can be built in stone. Bridges, capitals, rail stations with vaulted ceilings. They endure. They can be visited, photographed, restored. But what monument marks a vanished summer? What structure preserves the absence of warmth? In 1816, there were no cameras in common use, no daily newspapers reaching every village, no central archive collecting the mood of the sky. There were journals, ledgers, letters written by lamplight, fragments. And fragments require patience. If we gather those fragments carefully, a pattern emerges, not of spectacle, but of interruption. An interruption that touched farmers in Vermont, weavers in Lancashire, vineyard keepers in France, herdsmen in the German states. Different tongues, different rulers, the same unease. The unease that comes when inherited knowledge no longer predicts reality. The year did not destroy civilization. It did not topple thrones. It exposed something quieter. Dependence. Dependence on cycles, on warmth, on a sky that behaves as it did before. When the cycle faltered, communities adapted. They moved. They stored more carefully. They diversified. And then, when warmth returned, they resumed. But perhaps something subtle remained, a thin awareness that the natural order can hesitate. That certainty can thin, like light through haze. We often ask why history emphasizes war and not weather. Perhaps because weather leaves no enemy to name, no victor to praise. It leaves questions, and questions are less comfortable than conclusions. The year without a summer. Not allegory. It was lived. Snow falling on June fields. Children watching frost creep across green leaves. Mothers stretching flour thinner than before. It shaped migration, altered economies, shifted imagination between larger headlines. Perhaps the fading of its memory is itself a kind of lesson. That what feels stable can waver. That permanence is assumed until it is not. And that sometimes, the most transformative years, leave the faintest marks.